It's pretty mad to think that less than 5 years ago, Russia hosted the World Cup, the globe's biggest sporting event in terms of viewership, welcoming millions of fans from around the world to a tournament that was ultimately very successful for the country. The host nation went on a memorable run to the quarterfinals, beating former champions Spain en route. President Vladimir Putin proved his claim that Russia was, quote, an open, friendly and hospitable country following concerns about hooligan culture, with a tournament largely devoid of fan violence. And 4 years after the annexation of Crimea, which led to years of military conflict in eastern Ukraine, and just months after the poisoning of former spy Sergei Skripal on British soil, an attack which, despite Russia's continued denials of having any involvement in, led to them being condemned by multiple Western nations, the tournament helped consolidate Putin's position on the world stage, rubbing shoulders with a number of world leaders and FIFA President Gianni Infantino in front of tens of millions of television viewers. Subsequently, St. Petersburg was awarded the 2022 Champions League final, and Russia hosted 7 games at the delayed Euro 2020 tournament in the summer of 2021. Only England hosted more, and they also bid to host the tournament in 2028. But less than 12 months after that, the picture of Russian football could not have looked more different, after FIFA and UEFA made a joint decision to suspend the country's national teams and clubs from participating in their tournaments following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, which Putin labelled a special military operation. This has led to a mass exodus of players from the previously lucrative Russian Premier League, the national teams having almost no one to play against, and reports that Russia's Football Federation are considering the possibility of leaving UEFA to join the Asian Football Federation. But what has happened to Russian football in the 12 months since the invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions that followed? And what does the future hold? On today's EFD Explained, we're going to find out what's going on with football in Russia. Before we dig into this, it's worth noting that, of course, the Russian Football Federation are not the real victims in a war that has seen thousands of deaths on both sides, including Ukrainian civilians, the destruction of towns and cities, millions forced to flee Ukraine in what the UN has described as Europe's biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War, and a number of Russians, estimated between 500,000 and 1 million by various sources, leaving their homeland in what has been described as the country's biggest exodus in over 100 years. But for the purposes of this video, we are specifically focusing on what the ramifications have been for Russian football, with the country's national teams and club sides facing limitations not even seen during the years of the Cold War. So what are they facing? As already alluded to, Russian teams have been suspended from FIFA and UEFA tournaments until further notice, meaning the women's national side couldn't partake in the Euro 2022 tournament in England, despite having already qualified, while the men's team were disqualified from the playoffs for the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. This also saw Spartak Moscow, who had finished top of a Europa League group containing Napoli and Leicester, disqualified from the competition ahead of a last 16 tie with RB Leipzig, with Zenit St. Petersburg and Lokomotiv Moscow already knocked out of European competition by the time the suspensions were announced. Despite 4 Russian clubs appealing the decision, the Court of Arbitration for Sport upheld it that July. This is a big concern financially. A report by The Athletic last year revealed that UEFA had paid Russian clubs £83 million in prize money in the 2020-21 campaign, with Zenit, Krasnodar and Lokomotiv Moscow all receiving £20 million for competing in the Champions League group stage, and Spartak getting around £8 million for competing in the Europa League. With that revenue stream now cut off, there is far less money coming into the top of Russian football, and with no possibility of continental competition, clubs like Zenit and CSKA Moscow are now far less attractive propositions for potential new signings, with fewer eyeballs on Russian teams and zero opportunities to play against the very best. And even if the war were to end soon, or UEFA were to lift their sanctions for any other reason, 2 things that seem incredibly unlikely right now, the damage will have already been done. Due to their non-involvement this season, Russia has dropped to 23rd in UEFA's coefficient rankings below Sweden, Cyprus and Israel. This is quite a fall from their position of 8th in 2020-21, when they had as many representatives in European competition as France, while they ranked as high as 6th ahead of Portugal as recently as 2018-19. If they are ever allowed back in, it's difficult to know how many European places the Russian Premier League will even be afforded. The Swedish Allsvenskan, which ranks just above it in 22nd, possesses just 1 entry into the Champions League first qualifying round, and 2 spots in the Europa Conference League second qualifying round. This is what Russian clubs would potentially be given if allowed back into the fold right now, and there's no telling how much further they will fall down the coefficient rankings beyond this season. It's certainly a steep drop from having 3 Champions League qualifiers at the end of the 2010s. Not only has the Russian Premier League lost its pull for rising stars wanting to play in a top European league, but it has also lost a ton of talent over the last 12 months. Along with the competition ban, FIFA announced in March 2022 that foreign footballers playing in Russia were allowed to suspend their contracts and sign for clubs outside of the country, something originally legislated for until the end of that season, but later extended to June 2023. Within 2 weeks, 40 players from 13 of Russia's 16 top-flight clubs had left the country, with Kvaratskhelia one of the most notable, returning to Georgia after 3 years playing for Rubin Kazan. He was one of 6 players to leave the club following FIFA's ruling, and they subsequently won just one of their final 10 league games and were relegated, dropping out of the top flight for the first time in 20 years. They also missed out on the €11.5 million Napoli paid for him that summer, with Georgian outfit Dinamo Batumi enjoying the full windfall. An awful turn of events for a club that were reportedly holding out for a €20 million fee in the summer of 2021. By July 2022, there were 124 foreign players left in the Russian Premier League according to Transfermarkt, down from 183 in the 2021 season. At the time of recording, that number has plummeted to just 45. With such little overseas talent, including managers such as Daniel Fark, who resigned from Krasnodar following the invasion, it's inevitable that the Russian domestic game will suffer in both the short and long term. It would take a much longer video than this to highlight everything that has affected Russian football since February 2022. Loss of sponsorship, kit manufacturers, and the effects of a domestic economy in steep decline, to name just a few. And it currently doesn't look like their isolation from the global game is going to end anytime soon. But one alternative that is apparently being discussed is the idea of Russia leaving UEFA to join AFC, the Asian Football Confederation, which would follow what Australia did in far less controversial circumstances when they left the Oceania Football Confederation in 2006. And it's a very real possibility. According to a report by The Guardian's John Durden, while Western-aligned members like Australia, South Korea and Japan would be expected to oppose such a move, they no longer hold as much power as they once did, with Salman bin Ibrahim Al Khalifa, the Bahrain royal family member who has been AFC president since 2013, seemingly open to Russia joining if they leave UEFA. Saudi Arabia Sports Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Turki Al Faisal has also said he would not be opposed, while former Soviet republics Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan would also reportedly support it, having fielded 3 of the only teams to have actually played Russia's national team in friendlies since last year. But to what extent such a move would benefit Russian football is another matter. Asia will have 4 extra places for the expanded 2026 World Cup, and given the country's relative strength compared to many national teams in the region, they would theoretically stand a better chance of qualifying than they previously have through UEFA. But as long as FIFA's ban remains in place, they wouldn't be able to compete in America anyway, and there are still a number of Asian teams who could feasibly refuse to play them. And in club football, the financial incentives are minimal. The winner of the AFC Champions League receives the equivalent of £3 million in prize money, only marginally more than the €2.8 million that a single victory in the European Champions League group stage rewards you. It's no surprise then that CSKA Moscow president Yevgeny Gener said last year that, quote, "Perhaps we should wait for a return to big European football." But when a return would even be possible is anyone's guess. It's fair to say that there are no easy solutions to the mess that Russian football is in right now. So that was our look into the situation facing Russian football right now, but what did you make of it? Can you see them joining the Asian Football Confederation or not? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, why not check out the rest of our Explain series? Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.